Nohumai Heremai, Tenekotu Katua. Warm greetings to everyone who is joining us here in New Zealand and from across the globe. It's nice to see many recognizable faces on the participants list. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the lecture of Leor Lovinger as part of our Thinkers and Doers lecture series. My name is Bruno Marquez, and I am the Program Director for Landscape Architecture at Te Rangawaka Victoria University of Wellington. The Thinkers and Doers lecture series aims at bringing together practitioners, scholars, students, and the wider community of landscape architecture and affiliated built environment disciplines to share ideas and to hear the latest innovations in the field. This is a joint initiative between the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and Victoria University of Wellington. Our 12th speaker, Leor Lovinger, has 23 years of experience in the field of landscape architecture and urban design. He is the founder and the managing director of Studio Urbanof, a research-based design practice committed to the innovative design of public spaces, urban resilient, and biophilic design. Over the past decade, Leor has taught and lectured internationally, and since 2013, he's the acting IFLA Europe's Green Infrastructure Director, and in 2016, he was appointed as an expert consulting to the European Commission Eclipse on nature-based solutions to support urban resilience. Prior to this, Leor studied, research, and practice in the United States for more than 8 years, and his last position was Senior Associate with the Office of Michael van Valkenburgh. He holds a Bachelor in Landscape Architecture, cum laude from the Technion, Haifa, Israel, and a Master's degree in Landscape Architecture from the University of California, Berkeley. His lecture, titled Resiliency and Biophilia in an Evolving Cultural and Urban Landscape, looks at the human need to connect to nature and other forms of life for our own health and well-being, especially in the current situation of highly urbanized and dense cities, as well as the intensity of life associated with such pressures like the current outcomes of COVID-19. Climate change and its related challenges, especially in Israel, require to consider how to develop, and most importantly, how the natural and built environment can be adapted to the increasing threats of desertification and flooding. Over the past decade, Leor's work has focused on how to turn water from a risk to an opportunity and how to apply water as a medium to engage and enhance nature. That by applying water-conscious design in a semi-arid environment, we may learn not only to live with water, but to thrive with water, and how this approach encourages new developments to be resilient, sustainable, and have attractive environments. In this lecture, Leor will share from his studio's experience in nature-inclusive designing as a strategy to address climate change and enhance biophilia. Just some very quickly housekeeping rules. Don't forget that Leor will be sharing the screen, so keep this window open. He's already sharing, as you probably can see. Also, I would appreciate if you remain muted throughout the talk, and at the end, there will be plenty of time for opportunity for questions, either verbally or written through the chat box. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Leor all the way from Tel Aviv, Israel.
Thank you very much, Bruno. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the pleasure and honor. And I've been running through the faces on the screen, and a lot of colleagues from Europe and from my alma mater in Berkeley. I think that one of the things that I did towards this talk is here in Israel, we're in a lockdown now during the COVID-19 crisis that we're all experiencing. And one of the things that it brought to the front is it further enhanced this dialogue and talk about our need to engage nature. Our work, and I think the base of our practice really talks about water, especially in our region, which is a scarce matter, and we have to occasionally deal with both the lack of water and at the same time severe in Israel over the past years because of major development. And I think that at the base of the talk, before I just start, I wanted to say that for those who didn't listen enough, my education at Berkeley, which was very much environmentally focused long before the crisis of climate change, and also the work. I've had great, I'd say, much luck and pleasure to work in great offices with some of the iconic masters of landscape architecture, and they've definitely influenced my approach. So the first image of my talk is my the nature of my landscape of my childhood. I was born in Montreal, and you know, and this hill I got to run on it about 3 years ago in the World Design Conference, and this idea of how humans connections with nature and other forms, that goes way back. And even if we go just 150 years back to Central Park and the ideas of Central Park, especially as we perceive it as an icon of nature with these bluestone outcrops. And these are my kids on these outcrops when we lived in New York. But one of the things, and there was this amazing slide that I saw at a lecture when I was in New York. This is, and later I borrowed it from Stan Allen, which really talks about the construction of Central Park, and what we perceive as this icon of nature is basically man-constructed. And you know, the information is stunning. You know, 10 million barrels of rock and poor soil were removed. 14,000 cubic meters of soil were brought from New Jersey, and 4 million trees were planted. And in Israel, we also have examples. Also, my former boss, Israel Prize winner Dan Tzul. This is Gan Shlosha, Sachne in northern Israel. And when we talk about the Middle East in general, especially we have a lot of European designers coming to Israel to work. Everybody perceives this as this Mediterranean landscape with its palette of plants. And there's an image associated with that. But when we look at Tel Aviv, for instance, and we look at the urban areas, it's quite harsh. We see that the urbanism, the intensity at which we develop our cities, is challenging the way we look at landscape. And it raises questions of how can we, as landscape architects, address the urban landscape in a manner that is powerful enough, that has enough meaning in it, both to address our needs for nature and living. And so one of the things when we look at examples, I think that Burle Marx, his work is best appreciated because he was like the landscape architect that worked with this brutalist that we all know, of course, Niemeyer. And the fact that he took the icons and the ideas of the Amazon forest into buildings and into the landscape as inspiration, I mean, he had to intervene in a manner that was powerful enough to work with Niemeyer's work. And we can go to Halpern's work and how he brought the ideas of the Sierra into his work. And that actually helps soften modernist approach. So when we're looking at the brutality of which our cities are developed today, with very much with developer-led, then that is one aspect to look at. And also my former employer and definitely one of the offices that had great influence on my thinking is the office of Michael van Valkenburgh, who looked at all these bluestone outcrops of the northern eastern hemisphere in Northern America, and how they inspire these nature-based parks and how they address nature. So first project I want to talk about, really, in sense, it talks about I would say something like a 7 or 8 year process. Our office process, because we worked with marine biologists We submitted a competition, one of the most important competitions in the ocean, in 2011, the Savannah Ocean Exchange, and we came in second place. And these marine biologists, Idon Shimrit from Tel Aviv University, they were PhDs at the time, now they have a practice. We're developing different matrices of concrete because most of the development in the world along coast is with concrete, and then we're looking at an ecologically sustainable manner of developing coastal areas. And I gave a lecture at the university. I was talking about my experience at Valkenburgh's office, and then we after this competition, I basically got exposed to their work, and some of it was how they were testing different composites of concrete, changing the basics of the concrete. For instance, instead of sand, they were using quartz and integrating volcanic rock to give it more porosity. And that, together with an investigation of complexity of surfaces, showed that the recruitment of nature within the ocean depended on both a more intelligent matrice of concrete and complexity. And on the lower images in this slide, you can see that the research was showing very much success in the ocean. And through our discussions, sometimes on coffee, sometimes on wine, I was wondering what we can do within the landscape that is above water, the onshore landscapes. And I got back to Burley Marx, who for me is also a very influential person in my work, and his gardens and concrete wall and gardens. And I started questioning what could be done with that, and we worked on a composite for the shore. On the lower right screen, you can see this 30 by 30 centimeter concrete composition, and part of it was trying to see how plants can grow along this, and because it is porous, because each tile, the way it's poured and composite, you can basically dip it in water, and after it finishes to drip, it holds a half a liter or 500 milliliters of water. So we were looking at something that basically can help induce planting. We found one of our gardens we were doing at the time. This is on a 5th floor of a roof of a building. And we took this 90 centimeters wide wall and 6 meters tall, and we did the first pilot of this bioactive tile. And later, our office was part of a competition for the comptroller building in Israel, in Jerusalem. And as part of that, the archive was supposed to be in a lowered garden, a lowered walled garden. We had this idea that this bioactive tile could be like the wallpaper for this garden. And so this very harsh environment could be a very an enclosed garden. And eventually we together with the developer, together with the architects called Epstein, we won this competition, and this became a reality. And this is the first time we engaged in a project. And the scientists thought that we can take this further, and they started developing these pockets. We kept this dialogue going on, and then we had an urban project in Tel Aviv. We call this project the Urban Oasis. It's one of Tel Aviv's leading architects, Gidi Baorian. It's a very challenging corner that the building is addressing, and the space itself, you can see this is the view up looking from the court. It's sort of an enclosed court with an opening to the south, and it brought in again this idea, if I go back to the earlier slides I showed, of how in a very complex urban dense unstructured building, how can we bring nature into this garden. When we look at the plan, it's all commercial activity on the exterior, very much like a European complex where you enter and then there are 3 cores. This is about 70 apartments. And in the garden is then this entry garden that connects, has a social factor within this building, but also sort of an entry from the intensive life. And then on the southern side, it opens up and you can really bring in the Mediterranean palette. To some degree, because we're using recycled water, and that's another part of how I look at landscape, that to bring the native landscape, it's very hard to hold in a shaded vicinity, with Tel Aviv growing at a pace that will look like New York in about 20 years, with towers of 30 and 40 stories. We have to find a means. You know, agapanthus would never be related to as an Israeli plant, neither would Legasthemia. But we have other plants that are very much the Mediterranean palatine herbs. But when we look in the internal court, so because of the commercial activities on the exterior, we got almost like a 5 meter tall wall that runs the entire length of the court. And then we developed with the scientists pockets. That was another way to develop and take this further. This is another few views of that site and how it looks at night. And I'd say the client was very forward thinking, and the approach to the building is sustainable. Like, all the apartments have the same air conditioning, and all the water is collected, all the water is recycled. So we can really look at a palette that maybe has the need for more water. And it's a Mediterranean enhanced palette of planting that combines both the shading that we needed, or plants that can address the shading, but also the Mediterranean palette. We want to feel our native culture even when we're in these challenging environments. Also very complex watering systems. We have very good consultants. Tova Levinov works with us on all our things, and you can see the recruitment of biology in all of these. And this has been an open laboratory, and it's been growing mosses and lichens and climbing vegetation. And they've also, the scientists, and we've been working with them on research within the court, because what happens with this wall, by the way, I want to go back one or two slides here. So there's a drip line at the top of this wall that works in the morning. So this drip line wets the wall, and so these tiles that can hold a half a liter of water basically capture the water, and then it's supposed to induce the planting to grow on it. So when I look at, I'm going back, so it's also serving as a cooling block. And so they measure the temperatures on a hot day, both within the courtyard and out the courtyard on the street. And we find differences. The delta is anywhere between 2 to 13 degrees. So when we talk about climate resilience, we can really, we call this a self-sustained oasis, because the users of these air conditions are basically creating the water that's feeding this garden, that's cooling the block, that's cooling the court, that's giving this very temperate climate and pleasant place for the people to gather. And we've also planted different type of plants, and we've been monitoring it to see what succeeds. And we hosted a group from Italy a couple of years back, and with the client, and she was shocked that this bird, which we call in Hebrew, has a Hebrew name atoll, is one of the birds that's disappearing from our landscape. And so there's something very iconic that what we developed with the marine biologists for the ocean became a nest. And so this whole connection with nature had more meaning, especially with this group that visited. It was a great moment. And in the urban environment, just one more example before we stretch out to the agricultural and rural areas. This is a map of Tel Aviv. We can see the port of Tel Aviv. For those a bit more familiar, Rabin Square, where the prime minister that was assassinated. And so Tel Aviv is a very dense area. It was developed by a Scottish planner, and we have beautiful boulevards throughout the city. And this site, on the background of the open areas, this is a 8-hectare or 80 dunams site with 14 towers. And what we tried to show here to our client and to the city of Tel Aviv is that there is a lack of public space in this area. We saw that in that first image, that there's always the more need for, as we become more dense in our cities, the need for open space. And so we tried to bring an image or an icon of something that is off-grid, something that works opposite to the 14 buildings and the city grid. And based on early planning, it has 4 major entries. And once you walk in through here, you're suddenly in a different environment. This is a 2-hectare park. It's like 20 dunams. And some images of that park, which also manages stormwater. And just to show, I think I left in here an image. This is from Michael van Valkenburgh. This is Teardrop Park. I moved to New York and I joined the office when this was in the last phase of construction, and I actually helped with some of the minor details of the second phase. But I mean, how to build an urban complex in New York, and just when you step out of the building to be engaged in nature is something that I think was fascinating and is fascinating about the work of Valkenburgh. And I think that how we look at playgrounds, you know, we're not constructing them in this project the typical way that one would construct them. And this is another one of my mentors, Halperin. And this is Stern Grove Theater in San Francisco that I also got to work on some of the deals. I didn't manage the project, but I worked on it as one of the staff. And this is you know, a performance of his wife's Anna Halperin, who's more than 100 years old these days, and wish her best of health. But as an inspiration, I've had to really look at the gathering areas and the nature within this enclosed block of 2 hectares. And at the moment, this project is in construction. We're starting to see the scale of it. This is the park itself. Most of the buildings, or all of them, are on structure. And we're looking at the detailing of that as we speak. The next project we'll talk about is the Mandel living roof, which project we completed recently in Jerusalem. This map is the basically the master plan, the nature master plan, or open space master plan of Jerusalem. And one of the things we wanted to show is that through these valleys that our building sits on the extension of one of these valleys, and all of them are basically, as you can imagine, all of us speaking the same language. We're talking about ecological corridors. So within this valley, the building is sitting, it's right near the botanical garden of Jerusalem. And because the corridor, and the building was designed by Michael McKinnell, who passed this year. He got ill with COVID-19 and passed. So he passed 2 months before the building was dedicated, which is sad. The local architect is Randy Epstein, and the building itself has 2,300 square meters. And when we wanted to basically look at the valley and how it runs through, it's an area that's going through construction. We wanted to allow for this corridor to pass, and we explored the idea of a living roof. And to do a living roof at that scale is basically the largest living roof in the Middle East. So we've been told. And we approached the director of the nature director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Amir Balaban, who is very much, I think, very unique in Israel in the fact that he represents the nature authority, protection agency, but he thinks of how to best work with development and without compromising, I'd say. And so what you do on a living roof is you basically peel off the land from one of these mountains. A lot of the areas that are going through construction, you basically take off terra rosa soil and you put it on a roof. And this is an example for the project they did in Jerusalem, the bird observatory in Kiryat Leon. And you can see it's a seasonal issue because there's no watering, it's not watered, it's not domesticated. It's natural in a sense. When you bring the soil, you bring the natural seeds with it and the natural plants. And it's a very sustainable manner. And obviously, when you think of our culture, when you have a roof like that, then you're air conditioning less. And so we decided to do that. But when we decided to do it, the building was already planned, so the structure couldn't hold as much soil as we wanted. So we ended up with what we would define in our regular terms an extensive roof. which means it can't hold much soil. And this is also was sort of a state-of-the-art approach to try in our climate to work with 10 to 20 centimeters on the roof and to enhance it with ecological structure to the rocks and the recycled pruned branches and decaying tree trunks. And then we planted the roof with over 15,000 seeds and plants, geophytes, and then seeds and annuals, and also sedums. And this is the planting plan. And one of the things I've learned through the work I've got to do in these amazing offices that I've had the opportunity to work with green roofs is that even within a roof, you can have several microclimates. And my approach to green roofs is very Darwinistic. In other words, you create something that looks like a Jackson Pollock painting, and you let nature do its thing. And in some areas, one plant, the sedums will be the dominating, and in others, the geophytes. And sometimes, even within a small distance, just because of the sun exposure and the soil humidity, you can get different types. So this is the roof, and obviously to plant this roof with that crazy plan, we had to set out a grid. And I'm just showing briefly because it's such a simple roof, a living roof. And I must say that when we do these projects, the idea is to take a public building and say, well, if we can do this in Jerusalem, we can do it in the heart of Aviv, we can do it anywhere. So the idea of thinking of these very simple sustainable roofs with native plants as an icon and as an example of how to develop public buildings, that was one of the major goals that we set for ourselves. So this is the roof, and just a regular, anyone that did a green roof knows exactly what we're looking at with the drainage and then just bringing the soil. And these are sites that are supposed to be excavated for public buildings. They're all covered, and the material is spread. And we've brought sea squills, which I'll show you in a minute. Whoever doesn't know this plant, it's quite amazing. It sits on the ground and then goes up to about 1.5 meters tall. And we put 2,000 of those on the roof. And one of the things just with an ecological park, it takes a year, 2-3 years to the biology and ecology to develop. But also one of the things is that there's a regular gardener that won this project. The construction company, they're used to do regular gardens. So we had to teach them how to plant these geophytes and seeds. And we've been there very much almost every day working with them on these plantings. And we also had to meet with the client and tell them how they're going to maintain this roof and how to maintain a roof. Like these are sedums collected from the hills of Jerusalem, also from sites that are supposed to be excavated and worked. So we're saving these plants and we're keeping them in Jerusalem and living. And for those of you that are less familiar with sedums, each of these spikes coming out are basically plugs. So each of them, we separate them by hand and we plant them on the roof. Even though the site work was running a bit behind, the roof was given a priority so we can finish the planting just before the first rain of October. This was a year ago. And these are the first rains, and the roof can hold 450 cubic meters of water, which is another issue that we wanted to show as an example to people in the region and in our administration in the Jerusalem Planning Authority, is the role of the environment and how this roof can hold water and basically reduce the effect on the. And so as the roof beginning to spring, you can see that the site work
Well, there you are back.
we're gonna beat technology eventually. So this coming back, I don't know. I hope I wasn't cut off too early. I was talking about this roof that we advanced the work on it, even though the site work wasn't finished. And this is the first images of spring coming up, the first seeds. And we start finding all these different. It's like CSI in New York. We find all kinds of bones and stuff on the roof. So all kinds of crows and other birds are bringing stuff to the site. And these are the first flowerings of the sea squills about a month and a half ago. Bruno, can you hear well? Is everything okay with the connection?
Yeah, everything is okay now.
Okay. So I'm moving on to the next. Yeah, I'm moving to the next project, and one of the issues that also I feel we're very lucky to have in our office. I'll say we're masochistic. We choose very complex and problematic projects that nobody wants to take, and we work on them for 6, 7, 8 years, and eventually fight long enough and find the right people to team up with, consultants and clients. So this project is something that I'm very proud to be part of, and what we're looking at is a nature park in the heart of Israel. It's located somewhere between Tel Aviv and Haifa, about a half an hour from drive from Tel Aviv, a half an hour from Haifa. And one of the things that in Israel, because of the Africa's Great Rift, it's a major route for birds. And so when there's water in our country, it's very, it has a major influence on the landscape and on nature. And Emek Hefer is a valley. It's the agricultural valley of Israel. I think about 90% of the cucumbers are grown in this valley in our country. And it's also, in terms of wetlands and habitats, there are a lot of body reservoirs. It's 46% of the land use here basically is aquatic habitats. And this site was a site that was fishing pools, an agricultural use that is not very economic these days. And the pools were neglected because they were just not economic. And a succession process started. And then there was a battle between the green agencies and environmental agencies to the agricultural agencies that want us into a water reservoir for the agricultural site around. Eventually, the kibbutz, Kibbutz Ein HaChoresh, gratefully they gave this land to the country as a sort of a gift for 50 years, and then this moved forward as a part. And we worked with ecologists and with other partners. It was a very long process, and long story short, we did all this research on these different pools. Each one had different ecological values. The great things working with ecologists is that we know that when we look at different levels of the water, we're talking about different habitats for birds. And when we look at the pools, and we know that water usually, when a pool fills, it's the same site. On the dry season, we did some excavation here on the bottom of these pools. So there are different levels of water. And this site already had some activity. Since we completed it, we did the design. These are the bird watching buildings that we also designed in-house. And for those of you who still know Neufeld, maybe more, but everything is computer-based and accessed on the internet, but you should look up Neufeld. And Neufeld is German books. They would look at the human scale. They have all these beautiful dimensions. So one of the things that's important, we were looking at accessibility and kids and how they would engage nature within these architectural units. And once you think creatively, then the kids and the families will use them in ways that you never imagined, right? This is someone supposed to be with Ellen through binocular. But the way a kid can engage nature, I mean, those are magical moments, and that's what makes our profession all worth it all. And people reach out, and people need, if you get 30 minutes from your home to a site like this, that's a quality. And definitely if there's public transportation, which is something that we still lack in Israel, but it's moving forward. And there's a serenity to this. And there's, when you live in those urban moments in Tel Aviv or Haifa or Jerusalem, there's a gift to go out. And last year we had a flamingo here. This is within 1 year since we did the project. This is within 1 year. And there's like almost 1,000% more activity in terms of biology and birds. There's a research center, so there's a lot of documenting. We have a lot of birds coming from Russia, from Hungary, and being documented. And there's a Facebook site. Later, if anybody would be interested, I can give you the link. And this is now migration time. You can see amazing birds there. I know that in New Zealand, this porphyria, which is a rare bird, once in Israel, if you would know this bird is in a lake in the south, you would get in your car and go see it. And now in Agum Chefer, in this site, we have 3 families that are nesting there. So, and these are magical moments, right? This is how man meets nature in the most magical way. I mean, I think that it's quite spectacular. And this image was taken 36 hours ago. This is the sunset 2 days ago. So there are many photographers and bird watchers that are in this park 24 hours. These are pelicans that are now in Israel, specifically in the Emek Hefer Valley. And a couple of years ago, there was an intent to make an airport here. One of the things this park did is that it engaged the community, and the community worked together to battle off the government. And this project was canceled. So it's another thing in our work that when we create these very powerful moments of nature, then the community embraces them, and that helps make decision makers better decisions, even when they don't consider things right. Community activism, and this obviously is part of my education at Berkeley, and something that I cherish. One more project is the Coastal Park in Tel Aviv. We won this competition. Our studio won this competition 4 years ago. It was organized by Tel Aviv municipality with the Architectural Association. And this is the coast of Tel Aviv. This is basically all a new neighborhood that's being planned. So 12 or 13,000 units. Okay, so we're talking about almost a city of 40,000 people that's going to be living here today. None of this exists. There's this development and one other thing, but this is the nature park itself. This is an ecological corridor that runs to the east. And this is an aerial view of the site today. It has it's very magnetic when you look at it. This quote up here is by Fred Steiner, the Dean of Pennsylvania, which I thought was very, it captures a lot of who we are and what we're doing these days, right? Everything seems so clear from the air, as if the landscape were a reflecting mirror. And as we know, landscapes do not lie, and they are the embodiment of all that we do on Earth. And this site has been disturbed by 4x4, by jeeps and motorcycles over the years. There's been deterioration. And our proposal in the competition, we carefully examine all the ecological aspects, different types of birds and nature that was here. This is the major part of the park. It's 33 hectares, okay? 330 dunes. And we looked at ecological corridors. I take just some inspiration. This is from the Arc Bridge competition in the USA, from Olin, and even from Japan, how they address issues of hurdles within their railway system. So when we looked at even the streets in this neighborhood, we were looking at how to create passes, ecological corridors for to pass. This is right over here, this street. We're basically also now these days designing. We're about in the bidding process for these roads, and we're working on these. So we're actually turning these ecological corridors in work. We looked at the site and how, as we develop for people, we're also looking at what is there today. And similar, and I'm happy that before we look at this project, we looked at the one in Eklipse, because it shows what we can achieve if we approach a site with the right sensitivity. We were basing all our approach to the paths within this on the ecological surveys. The junction of these ecological corridor and the coastline, we suggested something that we called the forum, sort of a two-dimensional plaza to have events and music festivals and volleyball competitions, but all in a natural context. If all goes well, within 3 to 5 years, this part will be built. But what I wanted to show today, and so we're looking at the different habitats, what is in the park and how we enhance that, and this junction of these two roads is the lowest part of this neighborhood, and so we're looking at it as a flooding zone to help with resiliency for the neighborhood and all the wetlands and associated areas with that and their plant palettes. The cross-sectional typical section of the park. It's taller than the neighborhood. So in essence, when you think of Central Park, you can actually walk into the park and disengage from the city. And here the idea is that you can get up onto the park. Images that we created that are part of these experiences within the park. And some are in detailed design. These, and we noticed that soil erosion is a major issue. All these disconnections, how the interference of the natural paths, and so we're talking about ecological restoration here. So this is an image, a drone image of the site, and you could see how the water is ripping across here, and all these valleys are basically, the water is draining down. It's mostly sand, but also with this red soil we call hamra, and you can see the red soil. In other words, that everything is moving down, and the neighborhood, the new neighborhood that's supposed to come in, is really close. This is a very old zoning plan. I think these days would approve to build in this area, and what we're trying to do is minimize the damage and how to really build ecologically and how to restore the soil. But what we also talked about, I'm going back for a minute, so all the excavation for this neighborhood, we suggested a sustainable approach that connects this idea of development with ecological restoration. So we're looking at how digging the soil, we can use the natural soil, which is natural sand with seeds, with native plants within the park. And so this is a map showing the cut and fill of these streets, of the infrastructure. And then an approach of looking at what is the proposed elevations and the current elevations. So collecting the seeds and the geophytes, and they've all been collected. So now we're ahead of schedule, removing invasive species. We're going to basically collect the topsoil, which is the top 30 centimeters or the top foot, and then deep soil to get to the right elevations. And these will all be differentiated by the instructions of the soil scientist and the ecologist. And these are images that we've created to show, these are images we show to create this ecological restoration. So these areas, this is a very native and rare plant that grows on this hill. You can see that motorbikes ripped it across. And so we're looking at I call it soft engineering, different coconuts, webs to stabilize the soil, fill, and then planting seeds. These are the upper parts of the valleys that are causing the erosion that we've seen before. And so these approaches basically were at the last approval stage with the coastal government, or the coastal agencies. And we should be starting pilot projects on this within the next year. Lastly, and this is the last 15 slides of my presentation, is a competition that we've done recently, and we came in second. Those of you who track reality shows of music and cooking, you all know that the second place goes to the farthest eventually. So I'm not going to take it personally that we came in second. But looked at the Sorek River, and I'd say that our major client here was the Mata Yehuda, which is the regional council. And what we've tried to do is work within the basin, the Sorek River basin. And it is the largest and richest and most important natural resource in the heart of Israel. So Tel Aviv is north here, and Jerusalem is right here on the hills. And you can see this is the watershed. And one of the things, this is our site, the dotted site. Within its 16 kilometers of the river, and the city of Yavne, till last year, every year has been flooded during the winter, and we have an opportunity to address this issue and do something special here, ecologically, and at the same time provide resiliency to the coastal areas here. And so we're also sitting at an ecological corridor, two major national corridors that meet that come through our site, and it's a region of conflicts where this river, we're looking at it in urban, very industrial at heart, and Mata Yehuda, which is the regional council, which is our original client, which is molecular rural qualities, very much agricultural based. It's almost the Napa Valley of Israel today. It's an area that is boosting with wine, and obviously has a history for all religions, something we see over the years that's very important to maintain for all different people with all beliefs. And it's all within a half an hour to an hour drive of 60% of the population in Israel. That means 3 to 4 million people in Israel can access this site, and there's going to be a major train station over here. We've done a very large master plan. I chose to speak of several projects, so I'm not going to elaborate on the master plan, but we took these two specific areas, the city of Beit Shemesh and the Tzora Valley, and the city is tripling within the next 30 years. This is the original city. They're building both on this side of the river, on the southern side, on the northern side, and we're trying to maintain a very open and sustainable corridor. This is 70 hectares, 700 dunams. The river is flowing from east to west. And we've been looking, one of the interesting issues, we met with the mayor of which we've been getting support both from both the city and the regional council, and I'm very grateful for the mayor. And one thing she said, she has a dream, she wants a European style lake. And so we've created 250,000 cubic meters of water to pour over. And here, and one of the things we wanted to demonstrate here, if you already noticed a pattern in our work, is that we're working here also with Amir Balaban from the Nature Conservancy, and we're working with Ori Moran, who's a hydroecologist and eco-hydrologist, is how the ecology and hydrology and all of that is working in concert with each other. So we're looking at the different landscape prototypes and the different natures so that associated with it, and how the infrastructure is working with the flooding. And right to the west of this area that I spoke about is this lake that we're proposing, and it's all based on stormwater that is gathered and it's being filled with overflow of water. And the idea is creating something that's very sustainable, and this is 100 meters from the hub. When you have a lockdown, think if there's a lockdown in your city, you can walk down and experience nature in an urban context. And so one of the things we do in our office, this is a view looking out, and now if I look at that bird observatory and I'm looking back, this is all 100 meters apart from each other, and the type of experiences and qualities that we're looking and bringing to this mixed-use complex that will have offices and housing. So lastly, and these are the last 5 or 6 slides, this is the Tzora Valley, and this project will actually move forward, I hope, this year with detailed planning, and we hope construction next year. And one of the fascinating things about this lake, I put up on our a movie that we did of this, a 5-minute movie that we engaged the community, but this is about 1 kilometer wide, 800 meters to 1 kilometer wide, 6 meters deep of pebble aquifer. That means that when I look at 16 kilometers of this, the capacity of water that this area can hold is about 11 million cubic meters of water. And if we can hold that water, we can create a landscape that looks like this, which basically is a heaven for birds and for nature. And then this water is the water that's not going to Yavne, not flooding the urban environment downhill. And so again, there's full analysis. We've looked at the Japanese model of how to create underground berms to hold the water that is now flowing freely in the water, in the pebble aquifer, and look how to transform this valley into a biospheric region. And we're looking for funding, and I think we already have something like, if all goes well, 10 million shekels, which would be, I would say, the equivalent of $2.5 million US, or 2 million euros. And this is how this area would look from the aerial, maintaining the agricultural community and empowering it, enhancing natural tourism, nature-based tourism. We have a visitor center that we're planning over here, building on something that exists, and a reserve just in the heart of Israel. So this is the ending slide of my presentation, and I hope that through what we've built, you can imagine what we're trying to imagine in the projects that we're working on these days. And I hope I conveyed some of the concepts that I think are very important for our profession and for the cities and for the lives that we want to live and the planet we want to leave for our children. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leor, for such an inspiring lecture and going through this wide range of projects from small scale to large scale, having always nature at the forefront. While we allow some minutes for people to get their thoughts together and formulate their questions, I think I will start with, how have you managed to deal with different stakeholders, and especially governmental agencies and councils, to convey the idea that nature should be at the forefront of the designs, and especially when it seems to me that you are going through a period of dense urbanization in Israel. How has been the experience around that? I think you are muted. We can't hear you.
Okay. So when I worked at Halpern's office, and we would go up to Yosemite, he would talk about the salmon in San Francisco that they swim up the river against the current. And he said, landscape architects were like salmon, or trout. We swim against the current, and then the winter comes, and then we die. and then the young ones, or the students, or the next generation flows down to the ocean, and then later they come up to lay their eggs, and etc. So it's not the easiest path, and I think that we're creating a situation that our studio has polarization between people that will never get anywhere close to us, to those that would never take another client, another landscape architect. And we battle for things that we believe in, and we do it looking for the partnerships and working very hard, to engineering. Some say that engineering is the most conservative idealism in the world, other than religion. So when we work with engineers, we have to work hard to express our ideas, and we have to find the means of how to work both with engineers and both with our concepts of nature. And I feel that the new generations, especially when we teach these ideals at school, both to engineers and landscape architects, we're putting the seeds for sure. But these projects, many of them, they're projects that are going on 7 and 8 years. And if I could give any advice, if you can ever get a commission like some of these that we have luck on, get them in an early age so you'll live long enough to build them. That's all I can say in that matter. It's a bit rough.
Looking at our participants, is there anyone with a question for Leor? Don't forget to unmute yourselves, or if you are too shy, you can always type the question in the chat box. Well, while we allow people to probably think more about their questions, looking at the profession, Leor, what's your opinion in terms of what we should be doing that we are not doing at the moment as landscape architects?
I think that one of the things, and I didn't say much about the office, our studio. I feel very much we're 15 at the office, and very talented staff and very devoted. I think that one of the things that we try to push for at the office, and I say it's not just me, it's our office, is for innovation and to research. To do innovation, the other half of innovation is research. You have to, when you try to innovate, you have to base it on some research so you don't fail the first minute you start. I think that researching a topic, researching history, the ecology of a site, a community, what are the values of the community you're working in? If I design with the Bedouin in the south, I need to sit on the mat in their tent, and I have to listen and I have to hear what's important for them, what values, what they want for their children, what type of life they want. I think that in a world that today is very rough, where we, as human beings, we're less sensitive to our environment. We don't see the weak enough. We don't see the fragile and the ill. I think that if we look at them carefully, we'll be better people. We'll do better in our work. That's what I believe.
That's a very positive message. Someone just wrote a question, Salvador de Villa. How do you incorporate the maintenance of those large sites as part of the buy-off from the clients? Is this part of a collaborative process with the community and or the client city developer?
Salvador, we studied together, and he's also an amazing landscape architect working in Northern California, and I'm very glad and honored to have my friend join us. I think, and I was speaking about it on the Green Roof, that when we try to look at these nature-based parks, the way we build them with contractors, these contractors are used to building differently. They go and buy the cheapest type of stuff in a nursery, and they plant stuff the whatever way they want to do it. And when we do things different, with all modesty, I learn on these projects, on each and any one of them, because we're working with ecologists and soil scientists and hydrologists and eco-hydrologists. And we are learning in this process, and we're trying to engage the client both in the planning process and both in the construction. And we talked about how these landscapes need to be maintained, and both us and our partners different consultants. We usually, just like in that courtyard, we kept doing research there a year after we finished the project. And we were talking with them about the plants and seeing what's working and what's not. And that's knowledge we take to the next project. And it's also something the client knows in terms of maintenance, what plants are working, what are not. Even when we base our research on what the reservoir of water is to water during the summer, we'll learn if we need to plant it larger or smaller, and what happens when the climate is not exactly what we wanted, and there's a bit, there isn't enough rain. So I would say that we're still in a learning process. I cannot say confidently that we're experts. We're learning with everybody else, and we're saying that up in advance that we're going to go through this together. And there's an obligation on all hands to do this, but there's also great pride when a client is leading this process. They see themselves as leaders in how to look forward, especially these challenging times. The COVID-19, it took us off course, and we're not speaking about climate change. We're not climate change, and we're not. It's that is not being talked about these days, but that needs to be an agenda, and the way we think and plan and maintain is an outcome of that.
Right. One last question for you from Roseanne. During your presentation, I was remembering the lake of Eula when Israel decided to dry it in 1951, and later they discovered was a mistake. If I understand well the future vision, don't you think that this might be a huge change to the nature?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Maybe it's the hour. It's not the Thinkers and Doers hour. It's the Thinkers and Sleepers hour. But that was a historic mistake. That was a historic mistake, but it was fixed over time. And it's one of the most amazing nature reserves in Israel these days, the Hula. I would carefully say that there's a lot of scrutiny on these projects, and we're being reviewed by many authorities and committees and many professionals, and there is a chance we'll fail in some of them. You need to put that out there, but I would say because we're research-based, because we're doing it modestly, because we're consulting, we usually fight to get the best consultants to work with. We're trying to minimize the potential for failure.
All right, Leor, thank you very much for your time and for your amazing presentation and to guide us through all those very inspiring projects. On behalf of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and Victoria University, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for your knowledge. There is some other questions, which one of them, at least, you know the person very well, so I think you can probably just reply via email. And all the best, and carry on with all that part-time winemaking of yours. And I hope to see you again soon in the near future. And for all the others, I hope to see you again at the next Thinkers and Doers in 2 weeks from now. You take care.
Thank you, and thank you for the honor, and thank you everybody for participating and for joining me on this evening. And it was a great pleasure, and I hope to come back with some build projects in the future, and I'm definitely going to follow this series and join in the next few weeks to see the next speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Leor. Have a good day or a good night.